May I? Oh, oh wow, I disrupted myself. Okay, well, back to the last talk today, and we've invited Kongsberg to come and talk to us about what large companies like Kongsberg see and how large corporations, how businesses can work with startups and other organizations. And we've heard a lot of discussion already about the need to collaborate. I think the word these days is frenemy. I keep on hearing this phrase. So Matt Duke is from Kongsberg Digital, formerly at Odfjell. So he's come over from the sort of the ship owning operating side of things into Kongsberg, which is of course a highly technical and advanced company with operations in a lot of different businesses here. So this is a company that I imagine has had to really sort of address this digital agenda and try and find out how it can move things forward itself as well as for its customers. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Matt, if I may, for an introduction.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I'm not very good at standing behind these podiums, so I tend to walk around a little bit in the presentations. So, Matt Duke from Cambridge in the UK, lived in Norway the last 16 years, and as you said, recently left Odfjell SC to head up the digital platform for maritime for Kongsberg Digital. Kongsberg is a 203-year-old company that has innovated the whole way, from deep sea to outer space. In fact, it was a company that was a silver mining company 200 years ago. So I feel quite humble to talk on behalf of Kongsberg, to be perfectly honest. I want to try and have a starting point for the debate. So I will have three hypotheses. How can we address this challenge of corporates being disrupted in the age of startups? And for us in Kongsberg, I represent internal disruption. Kongsberg Digital is disrupting our own organization. So I feel it's important to start by saying Cognify and our approach is very much related to the three hypotheses I'll discuss with you today. All right then, hypothesis one, make innovation a core business vision. Over here, the visions of a business, for example, moving cargo from A to B to C, should probably include something along the lines of utilizing digital innovations with business value. Maybe tangible, maybe non-tangible, but if you don't start here, if you don't have anything about innovation in your visions, it's very, very difficult to set your priorities from business goals, which might, for example, talk around data-driven decision support, which then will lead on to you thinking, well, how can we make good data-driven decisions if we can't capture the data and we don't have clean data and we don't know what data we should be using? So from your business goals, which will be related to safety, bottom line costs, which we heard a lot about today, and top line growth, you cannot cut yourself to growth, right? So if your business goals start with data-driven decision support, it's much easier for your organization to set critical priorities which are related to, for example, perhaps new markets, new business models. They might be related to fuel efficiency, crew costs, things that you feel you can do better when you have data-driven decisions, which then brings you down to a digital roadmap. This isn't 2020, 2030, this is today. It's not IT projects, it's business transformation through multiple value-based imperatives. So my first hypothesis is set your priorities for your digital strategy. Make innovation a core business vision. My second hypothesis, pay attention. Pay attention to cross-industry trends. Form strategic partnerships. Together you can be stronger. And I would strongly recommend that when you're looking at your partnerships, when you're looking at your raw material, your information which you own, how does that partner treat that raw material? Will they help you refine value? Or will they make it hard for you to get access to the information? So open digital ecosystems. Sometimes it really is okay to ring a friend. I had an absolutely fantastic time for the 15 years I worked in Odfjell SE, a brilliant company which has made, I believe, some fantastic progress the last few years. I will never forget the time that a 28-year-old with a laptop helped solve a problem that hadn't been solved for 25 years. So sometimes getting an external view can be very, very sensible, and also to get a sanity check. If you don't have in your organization the skills to review potential digital trends, then bring someone in and have a chat with them. Get some input. Look outwards, don't look inwards. It is very important to keep your eye on the road. If you looked at my own career 21 years ago in one of the world's largest law firms, changing a hard disk, I changed that rotating machinery because an algorithm said, oh, it looks like this hard disk is going to go wrong. It's only now that we're really seeing condition monitoring and condition-based maintenance programs coming together for rotating machinery on board a vessel. The concepts aren't new, but often they come from different parts of the industry than your own. Bit of a messy slide, but I can guarantee you, you will not succeed without the right people. And people being the absolute key term. Digital disruption and the need for continual change as part of the entire company DNA is about culture. It's about ensuring that your board of directors has investment in their digital understanding, that your executive leadership team invites in the right people to talk to them, to brief them, to give them information about what's happening, mega trends in transformation. So then on the left-hand side here, it's about the doers, the people that actually have to lead this through the organization. You must empower your leadership to understand and drive the value of better decision support. They need to own it. It's much easier if you give them examples. Fuel economy is a very, and voyage routing, of course, is a classic one. But empower your middle management to use tangible examples of success and make it a priority for their teams and their colleagues. However, we do like to talk about digital natives. What does that mean? It means someone that understands what a computer is more than someone that was born 50, 60 years ago. Not always the answer, but I would encourage you to not think you can solve business transformation through one digital person. You need to have this new concept and new way of looking at business and new innovation thoughts across your entire business. You have to encourage them to be curious. You have to allow them to fail on non-critical systems. You need to leverage the knowledge they have and the ideas they have that might be completely different to the way your business has been doing things for the last 20 years. You need to start thinking cross-functional teams rather than top-down command and control. You need to get the best out of the people you have and bring in the best ideas you can. What this together should lead you towards is a culture and an agility to change, and to change all the time, and to move from being a business that changed when it had to being a business that's always curious, always listening and thinking, can that be relevant for us? Nah. Can that be relevant? Yeah, that could be relevant. Can that be relevant? I'm not sure. So you will have to become experts in things like risk heat maps, understanding, well, if we try that, what will happen? You have to start thinking about your information and the value information it has, and what would you be prepared to give away if you could get some better information back for things like benchmarking. So in the short 10 minutes I had, I have tried to start with 3 hypotheses that I think can lead to encouraging large corporates to survive in the age of startup.
More around the Nordic region, or is it a change that you think you see globally? Because I see the Nordics to be quite strong when it comes to IT infrastructure architecture, and even startups. So is this, when you're talking about a DNA, engaging the digital native, the generation alpha, I think they're getting known as well, is that something that's going to be easier in the Nordic region than elsewhere?
Well, when I look at our position and the truly international nature of the customers we're talking to, I would have to say yes and no. We have an advantage in Scandinavia in the sense that we've embraced digital change very quickly. So in our private lives, we're used to having a two-part authentication to get into our bank, to get into our tax statements, to get into our medical statements. It's kind of the infrastructure in technology and the competency of the people in Scandinavia are, I think, a step ahead. But at the same time, when I look at my schedule in the next 2 weeks going to Korea, I'd have to say, well, we're not the only ones that understand this. What I would say is perhaps a difference is when I've had a lot of meetings with a lot of Norwegian ship owners in the last few months, and it does seem that when I'm joining a meeting with a Norwegian ship owner, it's more about, I've seen this technology, do you think that can help? Or what's your opinion of blockchain? Do you think that we could do something with bill of ladlings with that, for example? Whereas when we meet companies outside of Scandinavia, it can be needing to understand what digitalization is, still thinking of it as a box on the side and not thinking of it as part of their culture.
Okay, so there is a level of understanding here in the Nordics, but still there's the range of understanding that something has to be done and they need to go start down that journey. Okay, I'm going to introduce our panelists now into this section, and that's Olivia Cadet from Kongsberg Maritime, Alexander Stensby from Klaveness, Konstantin Komodoros from Vesselbot, and Chris Rex from the Danish Ship Finance, and Maurizio Pilo from Lloyd's Register. It's quite a large panel, so gentlemen, if you could all come up onto this stage, please. Don't be shy. Now, we've got some very knowledgeable people here who I know, some of them I've spoken to before, and I know you've got a range of different opinions. I'm actually going to start with Vesselbot, if I can, because one of the conversations we're having here is about in the age of startups. And I'm going to ask you for your opinion on this, and then I'm going to go to Chris. But why are we seeing so many startups now? Particularly in the maritime field. Why is it suddenly that we see these companies emerging? Why do you think the appetite in this industry or the conditions are right for companies to suddenly emerge like yours?
I don't think that we see a lot of startups in the maritime industry. However, there are a lot of startups in general and in the broader sense of the market.
No.
So the reason for which I don't think that we have a lot of startups in the maritime industry is that you can see it from the adoption that we have within the market of initiatives and startups that operate within the market. In general, there are not a lot of successful, in inverted commas, companies dealing within this industry. However, there are a number of initiatives coming up. The reason that we don't see, I think, a lot of initiatives is that the market requires a specific domain expertise in order to be able to develop something. So that needs a prerequisite, the knowledge of the market. So this is one of the factors that it doesn't allow a lot of startups to enter into the market.
So you've got to know shipping to be in shipping.
Not necessarily upside down, but you have to have a brief knowledge of what is happening within the industry. Otherwise, you cannot cope with the way the industry executes per se. You can come as an outsider from the industry, but it will take you some time to get to know the industry. And startups don't have that much of a time to learn what is happening within the industry. So if you are underfinanced, you are most likely not going to survive the death valley where you don't have any revenues or whatever. So that's the problem with startups within the...
But tell me, I mean, when you talk about the sort of the valley of death and having enough money, enough finance, are the financial, well, the private equity, the banks, whatever. I can go to a ship owner and they'll go, I can't get that loan. So why are you finding that the startups, I'm not saying all the startups like you say, but are some of the startups finding it, are they flavour of the month? Or is this, a significant shift in attitude? And there are financial sources that you can actually successfully tap into.
I think if you asked me the same question 1 month ago, I might probably give you a different reply. We've been fortunate to get some inbound interest from big VCs from abroad, and this is becoming something like a trend, because big VCs do start recognizing that this is an untapped market and under facilitated market in regards to financing. So now the main players in the VC arena are recognizing the shipping industry as one of the industries that they can invest and reap a lot of payback from their investments. So now it is changing. We are getting more and more attention from the big players in the financing industry.
Chris, I've spoken to you a number of times about some of your projections about the shipping industry, and you've had some quite strong opinions about how the maritime industry and the shipping industry are going to evolve over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. I even heard you at CMA predicting that you're going to lose your kind of job will almost be redundant in about 20 or 30 years' time. Why do you think there is this appetite for startups in this industry at the moment? What's the reason for that, and what's your thoughts about how these startups will evolve and influence?
Super complex question to answer, but I will try to give it a best shot, and please add to it when you go wrong. First of all, I think that it's important to recognize that a lot of the traditional shipping players have found a very difficult shipping market for the last 7 years or more. So a lot of people have recognized that we need to build an additional value proposition to the existing one we have. We basically need to add an additional layer of profitability to our industry. Digitalization could be one solution to that problem, but it might not necessarily be for all participants. I'm a traditional old school banker. I'm not sure I'm the closest part here to the startup community. We tend to have most of the dialogue with the more established players that are also establishing startups within their organizations. So I will leave it to some of the other panelists.
Do you also think, though, in terms of your projections, I'm going to ask you just to elaborate on some of the thoughts you've had about the future of the shipping industry and how disruption. We've heard this talk about the fourth revolution, or shipping 4.0. Yeah. What's your projection then? What's going to happen to the shipping industry?
Our simple one-liner is that seaborne trade will increase by at maximum 1% from now to 2030. Opposite to.
So that's not a lot.
That's not a lot. But I think that there's a lot of fuss about the fourth industrial revolutions, and of course we both have a company side of the fourth industrial revolution of how we operate our companies, but we also have the economic side of the fourth industrial revolution. That is basically to say how changing the way we operate the economies. So take renewable energy as an example. Today solar and wind energy are able to deliver electricity at grid parity levels in most most parts of Southeast Asia. This is basically a product of the fourth industrial revolution, and this is basically it is lowering the demand outlook for oil and gas. It's basically all fossil fuels. So technology is both a question about how we do stuff in our own organizations, but also is also changing the underlying economy that shipping is serving. Yeah.
So going on back to the startups, and this is where Alexander comes into the conversation, I believe, because as Chris said, it's internal startups. I mean, how do you define an internal startup, and do you have to then be internally disruptive?
Is that me or you? Well, so I guess I come from outside of the shipping industry, and my background is from the startup scene. Coming into the shipping industry about 2 years ago, which I thought was really exciting because I didn't know anything about shipping. I know a little bit now after 2 years, but I think it's all about bringing the mentality of an urgency of change, of disruption is one of the words everyone's talking about. But I think it's not like the startup scene is something new now. And I agree with you. There's not like we see that many startups in maritime startups. But, you know, increasingly we're seeing more than 2 years ago, because 2 years ago we, you know, saw nothing. So yes, there's a pretty significant increase. But I think, you know, you mentioned it earlier as well, the ability to actually combine a new mentality and approach to solving problems, addressing problems, which, you know, comes from outside of our industry, and then combining that with the industry knowledge, the know-how of the industry, which, you know, I could never bring to the table. Putting them together, that was the recipe for what we started 2 years ago at Klaveness, and a lot of other companies are starting to do as well. So I think that's an important aspect of doing this. If you just, I mean, I almost compare it to this. If I went down into the basement with my team of software developers trying to make a magic solution for the shipping industry, I would never succeed, because I'd just imagine the problems, I'd imagine what the needs are. So combining that with the industry knowledge, I think, is the key to success. But then I guess a big topic is, should you do this inside the company, or should you actually do it outside? Because there are a lot of pros and cons of doing both of those models. So having the disruption occurring from outside, like the kill your mother approach, has a lot of positive aspects, but then on the other hand, you lose the connection to the existing business and the relations.
From a classification society perspective, Maurizio, when we see a number of different companies emerging, or internally, whether it's an internal startup or an external startup, you've got these new players coming with new ideas, they're all full of this enthusiasm. Do they understand the risk?
Well, I come from the digital world myself, so I'm pretty new to the shipping, and my role at Lloyd's Register is across energy, marine, and other parts. But to me, if we look at the needs, the digital needs of the marine industry, probably the technology is out there already, right? I mean, most of the technology is out there. So the problem is, where are the barriers to take this technology into the sector? And so we are talking about adoption issues and cultural issues and other issues that typically not technological issues. So what the industry has to work on is that getting that interface right between state-of-the-art digital technologies that has been proven to work in energy, in transport, and so forth, and what's happening inside a company, inside the industry, and so on. That interface is very important. Some companies are experimenting with acceleration methodology, some others are using a glorified procurement process where they state a challenge and small companies can respond to that. So the industry, all industries, not just maritime, are experimenting with that interface, because the recognition is that, especially in industrial sectors, it's probably 10 years behind where the consumer sector is at the moment. So it's not a technology problem, it's an interface problem, which requires collaboration, open innovation, and so forth. Do they understand the risks? Well, it depends how deep you want to go. I mean, the idea, to your point earlier, the collaboration between the domain expertise and the digital folks, that's the real key challenge. If you look at disruption in automotive at the moment, just to give you an idea, Intel bought a company for $15 billion about a month ago. $15 billion. It's an AI company. The founder I know personally in Israel, actually. That company is developing vision systems for cars. And they started from completely outside the sector, completely outside. They were looking at human tracking and so on. And then they applied that to automotive, and they said, aha, that's not too bad, actually. We can recognize traffic signs. And then they took it forward. And a few years later, you have a $15 billion exit. So these things happen regularly outside maritime, and the question is, how do we tap into that? How do we ride these waves of transformation and innovation? So yeah, the interface is my top choice. Yeah.
Is that why, Olivier, why there's Kongsberg Maritime and there's Kongsberg Digital? You need that interface, so you can go to them and say, I don't know, what are we missing?
Yes, it is one of the reasons why. But initially, when Kongsberg Digital was established, there was a recognition in the Kongsberg Group that a lot of the segments were on the same innovation trajectory. So everyone was working on the same type of tools, technology. So we felt the need to create a structure to put some harmony behind all these tools and technologies that were created, like the digital platform. But then there's another reason, which is a little bit goes to your point. We needed an area where people could experiment. We needed an area where people could make mistakes, try things, without necessarily having the burden of quarterly reporting, the burden of revenues and profits. Yes, this is important, and this will be important in the future in the world of digital, but you need to have the ability to innovate and to experiment. And this is a little bit the concept that you talked about of intrapreneurship. You need to have that entrepreneurship mentality within a big organization like Kongsberg.
So you really need to have the upper management. Going back to what you were saying in your speech, you got to have that upper management, not scared to say, right, here's some money, almost go and play with it, fail occasionally, do something strategic with it.
Correct. And to have the money, but also to have the flexibility to recruit people completely outside of your industry. You have also one of the questions, why are we seeing so many startups? Personally, I think because startups are filling the gap for competencies that large organizations have lost over the years. And we see it, and there's a tremendous need for that. And disruption requires brand new skill sets. And there's a good chance that the disruption in the maritime industry will not be coming from maritime people. Uber was not created by taxi drivers. Airbnb was not created by Hilton. So we have to also to recognize that.
You say that, but you said almost, not quite the opposite, but almost the opposite there. You said you've got to have some knowledge of the industry.
The knowledge of the industry is a prerequisite in order to be able to deliver the value that is required by the market, okay? That either you can acquire it through a lean startup methodology where you go outside and ask a lot of questions and learn the problem, or you have a slight idea of what is happening in the industry and you bring technology knowledge which is outside of the industry and apply it within the industry. So I'll give you an example which is very clear. We ourselves are not shipbrokers, but we are entering the ship brokerage business without being ourselves a shipbroker, without knowing upside down the whole business models and the operations and all this kind of stuff. But we have developed something which fits to that. So we are not different in regards to, our views don't differ in regards to who is applying innovation in the market. However, as I mentioned, the problem is that you don't have the time, and because the sales cycles, especially in the shipping industry, are so big and so prolonged, you end up going bust without even being able to apply what you have developed. So my understanding of disruption, whether it's coming from inside or not, inside is what Klaveness does, outside is what Klaveness does, because they onboarded people that were not from within the market to bring them the technology knowledge that will be required to build whatever they need to build. So we are not far apart from what we are saying.
Chris, from your perspective, when you look at the markets as a whole, you said the growth is 1% over the next, I can't remember what the period was, decade, or 2030. Yeah. So if it's that, how can such a small amount of growth be seen as a stimulus for this kind of disruptive change that we're talking about? I don't quite get how, if the industry is going to not grow, but almost stagnate, flat, where's that impetus? Is it just pure survival?
It can easily be regarded as pure survival, but I think one of the key messages we hope to, at least one of the discussions we hope to initiate is that yes, the future market looks very difficult. We have positive order book fleet ratios in all sub-segments. So all sub-segments are scheduled for growth, but we see very little upside potential in demand. So basically, if we do not do anything else than what we used to do, we will not earn much money. So that's why we're arguing that we need to build some additional layer of profitability and additional value proposition to our existing business model in order to start to earn a yield on the investment we make. And equally speaking, it is fantastic profitable to be Uber, but I think that a lot of Uber drivers are finding it hard to make a significant profit.
There's always the disrupted disruptor.
Yeah, yes. So the future may not necessarily be for everyone. I think it is one of the key questions. We need to adapt, and if we do not adapt, if we do not change our way of looking at the industry, it will be difficult for us to be competitive in the future.
But in a way, we're looking at two levels of disruption. One is that high-level disruption, where the whole business model of shipping could be impacted. And the other one's on a more sort of nuts and bolts disruption, where you find a new way of doing a solution or a product within there. So that those two sort of approaching the maritime industry from top and bottom. Matt, from your perspective within Kongsberg Digital, which one do you see as having the most profound change within the industry? Because if you've got these bottom sort of the practical solutions, are they not going to have more immediate impact than the top one, where you got more fear of that substantial change?
Right, so at the moment, it's like you're on a motorcycle, and it's going faster and faster and faster, and this threat of disruption is the wind in your face, and you're like trying to hang on for dear life, and oh God, there's more disruption. If I take my hand off, I'm going to get knocked off, right? So there is kind of like a hysteria around the top level disruption, but there's also some facts. There's facts like GDP isn't connected to shipping growth anymore. Ooh, what does that mean? That's new. That wasn't written in any of the books. So there are facts that there's over $40 billion in crew costs today. There's facts that we need to have sustainable shipping, and we have to do something with the CO2 footprint. So I would say that lots of small, good initiatives and a cultural change to implement them can be the gateway to not being disrupted when the high-level disruptions occur. So by that I mean that if you can compete with a lower OPEX than your main competitor, but in the process you connect everything together and start getting information on how your business actually is run and what the actual profit drivers are, you're suddenly also in a world of, yeah, but then there's a huge number of different actors that we could connect to with this information, and maybe we need to be looking at getting into logistics, or maybe we need to be looking at not owning vessels anymore. Maybe this gives us the power of information rather than the assets themselves. So I would say that do something today and get your organization into the modus of continual change, and you've got a better chance of not being side-knocked by one of the big disruptions later on.
You and I had a chat earlier, and you referenced the changes that you saw within your previous company. Are you seeing that, Alexander, how you've gone into Klaveness and you're finding people, the staff are going, now I get it, now I understand it, and does it create a new kind of buzz within the company?
Yes, I would say on a general level, yes. But then on an individual level, you'll never get everyone on board from day one. You'll always have a lot of teething issues. You'll always have the non-believers. You'll always have the resisting crowd that said, well, why don't we just invest in another vessel? Or are we going to spend money on this digital thing? But I think, yeah, exactly, that's very cheap. So I think, back to the point here on external innovation from non-shipping communities versus internal innovation or disruption, I think that there should always be a synergy. There shouldn't be either one. We don't believe that we're going to change the industry on our own. We rely on other startups with an outside perspective as well. So I think, this isn't like one way or the other. This is a combination of them. We should encourage the startups that are non-shipping startups to actually come in and help us disrupt. And I think it's a bit of a simplified view if you say it's quite different to try to disrupt a very, very slow-moving, old-fashioned industry that this room is representing. I mean, getting everyone to change the way we do business, I don't think we can do that on our own. We need the outside to trigger that for us. Because if not, we're just going to keep going on with how we've been doing it. And it's like, well, that's how we've been doing it for so long. Let's just keep doing that. So, yeah.
From your perspective, then, Mauricio, you said you're a digital person. I presume you haven't had a whole career within LR. You came into LR as, helping. Is your job to stimulate digital innovation within LR, or is it your job to stimulate digital innovation for customers and your clients?
It's a bit of both, actually. I'd like to tell a story about adapting, so we have to adapt ourselves to that changing world. And we started to, as we do PowerPointing and designing the strategy, which is now fully rooted in the company and in full implementation. But when we started to put together a rapid application development team, bunch of hackers, right? And they started to code up applications for our clients in like weeks. People said, whoa, right, we can do this sort of stuff, like startups. Unbelievable. So that small thing, you can talk about it for years, right? But actually getting something done, something small for a client and delivering it, having data streaming from a vessel, going on the cloud, simple analytics to start with, now it's machine learning, and actually doing it end to end with a partner, with an external partner to add that disruption, they created far more change than 20,000 PowerPoints from anywhere in the organization. So doing stuff changes the mindset. And I will encourage everybody to think about starting small, running some pilots, investing just enough to understand what the potential is. And there is something magic, and that's what startups do, right? They don't PowerPoint and strategize for 2 years. They start implementing. And in the digital world, implementation is everything, execution is everything, and things can move very, very fast in terms of implementation. Now, adoption is another matter. And one of the things I wanted to do in my team, I wanted to ban the word Uber or Airbnb. Why? Because they live in a world that is hyper-scalable, right? So you do something right, you get a couple of things right, in this case the dual-sided market for both of them, and they can scale so fast that probably would be the fastest growing companies ever. In fact, they were. In other sectors, adoption is actually far more complicated. There is no scalable, hyper-scalable element there. So when we compare the two, we set an impossible bar to reach for anyone doing innovation. So finding the right examples that are relevant to industry are, I think, a far more exciting game than looking at Uber and so on. I know it's popular, but so getting stuff done, understanding how it's done, understanding how those barriers can when people don't want to implement.
So is it about having the guts to make that move before you really understand that move a little bit, rather than, you say, we don't sit down and strategize for months on end doing PowerPoints about the potential. We do
that too, but actually doing it, you move much faster, not just by doing it, because you can see things happening. You can visualize what success may look like. It's quite important, and in the digital world, everybody gets moving quite quickly, and that's the mismatch between a very slow-moving market and the entrepreneurial world out there that is, kicking around, that they want to do stuff, they can visualize success, they can visualize dual-sided market ecosystems, but they cannot get in the market, in the marine market. So, a very exciting time, actually, now.
Chris?
I agree with you to a certain extent about your urbanization or Uber and analog, but I think it is very important to bear in mind that the value it creates is also about insights and how these insights about when we know more about trade, we know more about trade flows and our vessel positions, we're also able to change our behavior in these perspectives. So the interesting points from a data sharing point of view, or knowing how the world trade is moving, is in my understanding the additional layer of value creation we can add on to our existing business. Yes.
Do you think that do you see an ability to change in the shipping industry in general? I mean, if you compared it to 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, is there much more of an acceptance, okay, we want to change, not we have to change, but we want to change. We want to be innovative. We don't want to be seen as a conservative industry that's just going to look at the bottom line and just say we don't need to change.
I think there's a lot of different answers to that question. It depends on where we are. I think in this room there's definitely an interest to change and to...
I guess I'm preaching to the converted, are we?
Yes, yes. So, but maybe you can, I mean, your home market is slightly more conservative than...
Yeah, what the broker market, for example.
Greek market as well.
Yeah, and the Greek broker market.
As far as we are concerned, we don't consider that shipping industry is not, has not been technologically advancing. It's not that the shipping industry doesn't want to advance or it doesn't advance at all. Take the recent developments that have happened in the market in the last 1 year or so. If you ask me, there are tremendous changes happening and much more are coming, or even though that they are not being published or announced or whatever, there are a lot of things happening. The question is how quickly each and every organization adapts to that, and not whether there is any change coming. So there are conservative markets, there are conservative companies, but not the whole market, as far as I'm concerned, is non-technologically advanced or doesn't want to advance. Different waves.
Oliver.
Just to add to this point, I think what adds to the appetite for innovation and disruption in the maritime industry is the challenging market that we're currently under. We get a lot of requests from customers to help them reduce OPEX, reduce CAPEX, and this can only be done by introducing innovation. I mean, let's face it, today the interest around autonomous operations is driven by a reduction of manpower on board ships. There's no question about it, and our customers are pretty open about that. Yeah. So the difficult phase we're in also drives a lot of innovation and disruption.
Well, you're involved in 2 projects I can think of. Is it Huron?
Huron Yara.
And the Yara project. Both are 2 completely different examples of how autonomous ships are being evolved in through a very entrepreneurial test bed environment. Sort of the culture here is helping push that, surely.
Absolutely. And what's helping in those cases as well is the fact that we have an area where we can demonstrate those technologies. Because the maritime industry involves big, large vessels with a lot of risks, we need areas like the Fjord of Trondheim to be dedicated to demonstrating that this technology can actually work. So we need to work with regulation, we need to work with class societies, we need to work with a bunch of parties to make this happen.
So you really need a culture or cluster where the culture is really about embracing all the disruption, the change, startups, and getting regulators, class societies, engineering firms, etc., all involved.
What's interesting is everyone in the cluster doesn't know the role they're going to have in the future. If you ask class today, they don't know. If you ask us, we have an idea, but there's a lot of questions. If you ask ship owners, they have a lot of questions as well. So
it really is a question of looking around a room going, well, we don't know, but we're going to do this anyway.
Yeah, it's back to the risk that you need to take.
Yeah. How do we see that from your perspective then? I mean, you've got this new role that I never saw in the maritime industry before, the Chief Digital Officer. Never existed up until all of a sudden 4 of you, 5 of you. Yeah. That's certainly fine. There might be more that I didn't know about. All of a sudden now we've got CDOs appearing in the maritime industry. Yeah. So you're sitting there with a new job title going, yeah, I come from outside. Actually, most of you come from outside of the industry as well. And you're looking, what do you take of this sort of uncertainty but growing enthusiasm?
Well, I think, on the title, I think that's, it's a bit of a silly title, to be honest with you. In my community of software developers, they all laugh at me. And, you can imagine this. At Google, they don't have a Chief Digital Officer. I mean, everything is digital. But I think, that aside, the title in itself, I think, is really important for our industry to actually show that we're taking a step into this digital world. Yeah. And, we're talking about disruption, and we're in the disruptive hall, so that's a natural topic. But at the same time, I think, as you said, we have been innovating in our industry for, in Klaveness' case, since we started 70 years ago. I mean, that's the nature of how we evolve. It's evolution, essentially. But this is a new ball game. This is about using data. This is about changing the business models. That's where it becomes really disruptive. And that's where you also get all of this resistance to change. So I think, you know, as you said, Matt, we need to start doing things. And that's what Klaveness did. So let's start doing things, start experimenting. And, you know, we have this mantra, try a little, learn a lot. So, you know, it should be okay to fail. And then your question earlier was, do you then see a change in the organization? Do you see an attitudinal change on actually being part of this? And that's what we've been seeing as well. Even though, you know, this isn't like a perfect story. I don't think anyone has the perfect story here, because it requires change even in the process. So we started out with one approach, we started doing a little bit, and then it starts spreading. So now all of a sudden we're seeing the finance department doing stand-ups, and, you know, they're using this planning board, and we threw out the budgets. And to me, it's like really energizing just to see that people want to be part of it internally and with our customers as well. So bringing them into a new way of doing things. And it's at a completely different pace that we've seen before. I think number one advice I would say is do not try to do this innovation project in-house and put it in your department. I mean, you have to do this with a different pace and a different approach than traditional IT projects. So that.
One of the areas that one you said in your speech is you've got to get that senior management buy-in. They're a key of this change. If you don't have the C-suite buy into this, then it's going to fail. It will be buried into the IT department then, won't it?
Yeah, and let's talk from experience. So Kongsberg Digital is not the IT department of Kongsberg at all. So from my perspective, a technology company like Kongsberg that's been selling its own software, suddenly having an open digital ecosystem where we're encouraging startups that need to scale to come onto the platform to take care of hygiene factors like cybersecurity, login, and those sorts of things, and we can get that out to the market for them. And that's a new business model, but it's also disrupting the own applications that we had that you're competing with. So for me to be able to sign a partner, the last partner I signed the press release was a logistics partner. It wasn't even a shipping company. So to be able to sign partners onto an open digital platform and then disrupt your own business cannot happen without me sitting with the CEOs of the different business divisions and saying, do I have backing for this? Yes, you have backing for this. Is it going to be easy? No. People are going to come up to you and say, hey, do you know that what you just did? You used our information, you just took that away. This is terrible. I know, and I'm doing it for the best of the entire company, not for me.
Is that being accepted, though? Is that really being recognised?
I think what you'll find is that either you'll have success and it will be recognised and large companies will continue to be large, or it will fail. And the naysayers will stop you from innovating and the companies will get smaller. Okay. So it's up to the top management and the middle management and the individuals to be part of a cultural change, but it's also up to the change agents like myself, the transformational leaders, to try and explain why and break it down in a way you understand. You know, if you're going to get a training watch, you could get one that just told you your heartbeat, or you could get one that tells you that when you're running up the hill over there in that weather condition, it was like, well, you could have run a bit less.
That must be what you're doing as well within it. As you're going in there saying this is what it means. You're educating as much as anything else. I was talking to Alexander. You're going in there and you're educating.
Well, to some extent, but yes, I would say that a lot of it in the beginning is about educating, but without, what do you say? In Norwegian we say without being belærende. I don't know the English word. Condescending, exactly, thank you. So I think that's actually quite an important approach here, because the results will be fatal if you actually approach it that way. So I think you really need to get, as you said, the management team on board, but then it also needs to, you know, follow through the organization, because the doers, they need to be on board as well, and then they have to have support from their team managers, etc., etc.
Good. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts for this really interesting. We could go on, but let other things go. So thank you very much, everybody.